like to introduce Dr. MeLisa Gantt. She's a research scientist and CEO of the Gantt Clinical Research Institute. She is a retired United States Army Lieutenant Colonel with 28 years of military service. Thank you for your service. And she served in roles such as Director for the Center for Nursing Science and Clinical Inquiry, Director of Research, Deputy Director for the Joint Combat Casualty Research Team in Afghanistan, and the Research Consultant to the Commanding General for the U.S. Army Regional Health Command in Europe. She holds a PhD in nursing, and Dr. Gantt is a published author and 3-time grant recipient with over $1 million in federal funding for her research in Reiki and binaural beat entrainment technology. So welcome, Dr. Gantt.
Thank you very much. Bob, thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate it. It's good seeing you again. Really miss being out there on campus. I want to say a big hello to everyone out there and also thank the Monroe Institute for this opportunity to share my research. Before I go any further, I do want to acknowledge that the research studies that I'll be presenting were funded by the Tri-Service Nursing Research Program. And for those who do not know who they are a subsidiary of the University Services University, which is a health science education campus out in Bethesda, Maryland. And it's kind of like the school for military personnel who are in healthcare. And the Department of Defense gives them funding for military nurses to conduct clinical research studies as well as evidence-based practice projects. And I've been so grateful that they had that funding opportunity because military nurse scientists, we cannot compete with the NIH grants because as you know, we don't get fellowships because we're not associated with the university. So we need a different funding source to do our type of research. The second thing, excuse me, is I have to give a big shout out and thanks to my research team. No investigator can do research by themselves. And during these studies, it was a series of 2 studies over the course of about 8 years of data collection. I myself got deployed and someone had to pick up the reins while I was deployed. And again, I could not have done this research without this team. So since we're talking about post-deployment health, let's kind of do a little deep dive. If you are in the military for any given amount of time, chances are you're going to be deployed and you're going to be deployed to an austere environment. Now, when we return from deployment, we are undergo a health assessment at the 30-day or less mark so that we can document, did anything happen? Are these things that we need to look for? And then that assessment is done again at 120 days to go back to look, you know, has the person gotten worse or better after returning from their deployment? Now, all of this information is then put into a database, and that database helps us to put preventative measures in place so that we can make changes to stop these things from happening when we're deployed. So do we need to do something to the equipment? Do we need to change the way we operate in a certain area? The other side of the information is that all this information into a database then helps us to create algorithms as to how to care for people who have these issues. And that is tremendous amount of knowledge if anybody ever wants to do research on post-deployment health. Now, if we look topically at what happens, what are the top issues that happen when we come back, they fall into 4 major categories. The first is mental health, and I think this is the one that most of us know because I think it gets the most press as well. The second one is polytrauma. So a person could sustain, say, shrapnel wounds as well as a traumatic amputation of a leg while having a severe burn. And all of that could have occurred in one little incident. The next thing is traumatic brain injury. So not necessarily we all know about the person who has a severe concussion or the person that has a penetrating injury to the brain, but people don't think about what happens when you're so many feet from an explosion. The shock waves actually can rattle the inside of the brain. When the brain hits the sides of the skull, because remember, it's kind of floating in there, it can cause contusions. Then you have a traumatic brain injury. The person can look fine on the outside, but could have something going on the inside. And then last but not least is the hazardous exposures. It could be inhaling of fuel, the fumes of fuel all day. It could be like me sleeping next to a generator for a serious amount of time. And it could be inhaling the particles in the air after an explosion. And all this has definitely negative effects. Now, there is one common deployment health issue that is really important, and that is sleep. Now, quality of sleep is really something we should really look at, because these 4 areas affect someone's ability to have quality of sleep. And then if we turn it in reverse, if you have quality of sleep issues, it's going to affect these other things, and they're not going to heal properly. So if we can do something about sleep, I think it will be a great, a great impact on the other things. Now let's look closer at sleep. Now, people, when they return from deployment, we kind of fall into 3 different categories of sleep issues. First, you have the person that can't turn off the thoughts and they can't fall asleep, or they've returned home to a more stressful environment, because we know that deployment causes havoc definitely on the home life as well. The second thing is the inability to stay asleep, or the inability to go back to sleep after waking. Now, it is normal for us to wake up multiple times during the night, because that's just part of the sleep cycle. And most of us just fall back to sleep and don't realize that we woke up that many times. However, there are people, and I think I fit in this category, that wake up and no matter what they do, they can't go back to sleep. We have people who may suffer from, say, bad dreams of memories of deployment, and they're kind of bracing themselves when they go to bed, which does not allow them to really go into deep sleep and be able to get good night's sleep, because they don't want to have the bad dream. So that will affect someone's ability to stay asleep. The next one is, although, yes, you're tired, you had no problem falling asleep and you slept through the night, but for some reason, even after 8 hours, you still felt like you didn't have a good night's sleep. And this could be attributed to the fact that maybe you did not go through those phases of sleep that are necessary for a good night's sleep, or it could be due to the fact that you woke up in the middle of a sleep cycle, and that made all the sleep that you got irrelevant. So if this is the issue, and we are trying our best to teach people sleep hygiene measures, and there are ample measures out there about keeping your room cool, having a 2-hour wind down before you go to bed, trying to go to bed at the same time every night. The problem with those is that, number one, they take an actual conscious effort to do. And if you're already stressed and you're dealing with things, that may be a tall order for someone. The second thing is that everybody knows that there are external influences that affect. You may have this fantastic plan that I'm going to go to bed at this time and blah, blah, blah. And then something happens that just takes you out of that and you never get it done. So is there a way that we can do the magic, but do the magic behind the scenes to get someone into a state where they can go to sleep? And I think there is, and that's the binaural beat technology. So the purpose of these research studies was to assess the efficacy of theta and delta frequencies on sleep quality. Now, I'll be using the term binaural beat and brain entrainment because some of the population knows it by brain entrainment and other knows it by binaural beat technology. So how does brain entrainment work? Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir, and so since these are going to be stored in archives and someone may not understand, I'm just going to go through this real quick. Now, conceptually, in our diagram, a person wears stereo headphones. A tone is sent to one ear and a slightly different tone is sent to the other. Now, as the brain waves go back and as the brain goes back and forth to try to figure out what it's listening to, a third tone is generated, and that's what we call the binaural beat. That then activates the reticular activating system, which turns the brain waves to move in a lockstep pattern with what that binaural beat is. Now, if we think about that from a physical perspective, a sound waves comes through the ears, it vibrates the eardrum, and on the other side of the eardrum are 3 bones that vibrate along with that vibration. That in turn vibrates the fluid that's located in a organ called the cochlea, and inside the cochlea are little teeny hair-like cilia that actually goes back and forth with the wave of the motion, and that sends the nerve impulse through the auditory nerve. It goes to a switch station. If you think of a big train station hub where you have a bunch of trains that meet and then they switch tracks and go different directions, and that is where the magic happens. And that is where the sensory input comes in that changes what the brain waves are. Now, if we think about the 5 brainwave patterns that we're all commonly know, going from the bottom to the top, the first thing is delta. So if we look at a brainwave in a 1-second burst, you see that it is the slowest brainwave, and that's the brainwave that we're in when we're in delta sleep. Now, one step up is theta. Now, theta is the in-between state when we're half awake, half asleep. The next step up is alpha, and I call this where the magic happens, because this is the state that most people try to get in when they're doing, say, meditation or magic or things like that. The next step up is the state we should all be in if we had our coffee, and it's the beta state. And then the state above that, which I think is one of probably the most fascinating states that we should study more, is gamma. And gamma is the what we call the aha moment. Example, I'm washing dishes and I have this inspiration about starting a business. That is what I call a gamma moment. So we understand that we can use sound to manipulate brain waves. Now, can we use that technology to help people who first can't calm down and go to sleep? So yes, we could do that. So what we do is we take people, we randomly divide them into 2 groups. One group will listen to music. The second group will listen to the exact same music, but with theta tones layered in. We would then blind them so they have no idea which of the interventions they're getting. And we do a measurement before, and then we do a measurement after. Now, someone who is a skeptic will say, you know, how do you know that they're both getting music, that it's not the music that's causing the effect? Even though we clearly state that these people are blinded and that they're randomly divided. So to counter that, for phase 2, when we move to try to keep people asleep, we will do something called a crossover method. And what that is we would randomly divide people into 2 groups. One group will have music, the other group will have the tones only. They will use their intervention, take a break, and then they switch intervention, where now the first group is using the tones and the second group is using the music only. Now, of course, a skeptic will come in and say, well, the people, when they use the tones, they know they're getting the intervention. So how do you know you're not getting a placebo effect? That's when phase 3 comes in. Now, we would divide people randomly into 2 groups, very similar to phase 1. Again, we're keeping people to sleep, so we're using delta frequencies. One group will have music, and the other group will have music with the tones. They'll take a break, then they switch. Now, the reason why we do that is because this alleviates the need to have a control group, because each person actually serves as their own control, because you have a baseline data. You have their data when they're having the tones, you have their data when they're listening to music, and you have their data when they're listening to music with the tones. After you collect your data for both phase 1 and phase 2, you then do a cross analysis to see, was there any difference when they used any of those 4 interventions? Now, if your study was set up correctly and it works right, the people who listen to music with the tones and when they listen to the tones alone, that data should look the same, and that tells us that it's the tones that made the difference. When you compare that to music, or you compare that to baseline when they didn't have the intervention, you should see a difference. So if you see a difference, then you've just proven to the naysayers that it was not the music, it was definitely the tones. And I hope that you understood that. So for our research study, to be included in the study, participants had to meet certain inclusion criteria. Number one, they had to have been deployed within the last 10 years. We first said 24 months, and we were finding that people who had came back well after 2 years were still suffering from whatever occurred when they first got assessed. So we said, okay, let's just open it up to everyone. The next thing is you had to be eligible to have healthcare at a military facility. This became tricky because a lot of people who deployed are reservists. And once a reservist is off of active duty, they then go back to reserve status, and that puts up a wall for their ability to come back in to a military healthcare facility for, I don't want to say treatment, but for access. The third thing is, of course, you had to be 18 years of older, and then you had to be available to be in the study for 5 weeks. Anyone who's been in the military know that you're either going away to school, you're either going for training, or you're changing a duty assignment, and people had to be able to commit for the total of the 5 weeks. Now, you were excluded from the study if you met these criteria. Number one, if you were taking antihypertensive medication. Since we're looking at stress for phase 1, heart rate variability was one of the tests, and an antihypertensive medication will change what the heart rate does. The second thing is anti-anxiety. Everybody knows that when you take an anti-anxiety, one of the side effects is sleep. And we want to make sure that the sleep was because of the tones and not because of the medication. And then third, anti-seizure medication. Anti-seizure medication suppresses brainwave activity. And the whole point is we want the tones to manipulate the brainwave activities. The second criteria was, since at the time we started the study, traumatic brain injury was so many theories could not be answered. So it was safe to keep these people out of the study because there were so many unanswered questions. Third was epilepsy for reasons we talked about. No, epilepsy, of course, because it's erratic brainwave activity, and most likely if you're epileptic, you're probably on an anti-seizure medication. The next thing is hearing deficit or ear trauma. So we want to make sure that you can fit the device. We want to make sure that you can hear the device, hear the sounds, and we didn't want anything to impede the tones going in. So data collection, what data would we collect? First, we would collect demographic data. Of course, that's typical for any study. The second is we wanted to collect subjective data. We wanted them to tell us how they felt. And there were 3 ways for us to do that. First, we would give them a sleep diary. And every morning they got up, they had to answer the few questions in the diary. Second, they completed something called a Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, and it's nicknamed the PSQI, and it's a well-known instrument. And this asks questions kind of about their environment. Is someone sleeping in the bed with you? What time do you normally go to bed? And it gives you data for what happened for the previous 30 days. The last question there was a post-study questionnaire, and this is something that I do for all studies, and it's basically about their experience in the study, because a lot of times you're planning your next study based upon what participants said about their experience in the study. Now, the third category, which is the bread and butter, is the objective data. And this is data that's collected by an instrument. And we used 2 measures. One was heart rate variability, and the second one was C-reactive protein. Now, heart rate variability is the heart's ability. What does it do when it's before being stressed, while it's stressed, and after it's stressed? So if you look at it on a graph, you should see variability. It should go high and it should go low with no problem. But when you have someone that has no variability, where the heart doesn't do anything when stressed, or if it is stressed and it doesn't come down, that's actually bad. Now, C-reactive protein is a blood protein that when the body is stressed, it's elevated in the blood. And the problem with this is that the protein doesn't distinguish on what type of stress. So if you say you didn't sleep for 4 days, or you sprained your ankle, or even if a woman is menstruating, the C-reactive protein levels can be high. Now, to counter this, we gave them a questionnaire, and it asked a series of questions of things that could have affected your C-reactive protein, so that when we do the analysis, we could toss out anybody that had any extenuating circumstances. So here's our study procedure. A person would see the flyer, or they would see a posting of it on Facebook, or they would hear about it from a friend. They would contact the office. We would then go through that inclusion, exclusion criteria to make sure they were a good fit. Schedule an appointment. They would come in. We then had them sign a IRB approved consent to participate in the study, and then they completed the demographic questionnaire. They also then completed that Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, and we sent them to the lab to get their first baseline C-reactive protein measure. Next, we scheduled a heart rate variability test, and it was very important that we did the test after they went to get their CRP labs for reasons you'll see on the next slide. Participants were then instructed to take this MP3 player home with a set of sleep phones, and sleep phones are stereo headphones that look like a sweatband. There's speakers on each side, they wrap around the head, and people usually pull the band down to cover their eyes. So not only do they have stereo sound, they also have a night mask, as well as sleep diaries. Now, on the MP3 player, we had the particular music file based upon what group they were assigned, and the music had a loop. So I think it lasted for maybe 60 to 90 minutes, and then it just continued to loop, and it played throughout the night. So all they had to do was push play and go to bed. They were instructed to use the intervention for at least 3 nights a week, and they had to be consecutive nights, but we had no problem. Everybody used it for every night they were in the study. Now, our heart rate variability tests. So remember, our primary goal for the first phase was to assess, can we calm down people enough so that they can at least start to get a good night's sleep? And we were testing it by heart rate variability. Now, we did literature reviews to figure out what's the best way to stress somebody out, but keeping in mind the type of people we were stressing out, because people who came back from deployment, you had to be very cautious of what methods you would use to stress them out. So we did research, and some of the data showed that one of the common ways to test people out was to put their hands in ice cold water and measure their heart rate. And I thought that was not good, because you could brace for that stressor. And if you can brace for a stressor, you're not going to have good heart rate variability measures. So I said, well, how can we stress somebody out where they don't see it coming, but it's still benign and I don't go to jail? And we thought, okay, how about that game Operation? Now, I think all of us here have played this game as a kid. And for those who haven't played the game, it's basically a little man, and you have a set of forceps, and you have to go in and pull out these little pieces without the forceps touching the sides, because if it touched the sides, the nose lights up and it makes this obnoxious sound. Now, that used to scare me a lot. And we said, okay, that's benign, but let's take it up a notch. What we did was we made the participants play the game in a mirror. So what was up was down, what was left was right. And then we only gave them 10 seconds per piece. So if you couldn't get your piece out in 10 seconds, we had a horn in the back that blew, and I'm sorry for laughing because it was actually pretty comical. And the persons were actually, if you think about it, were just getting stressed every 10 seconds because they weren't able to get the piece out. So how we did this measurements was we placed an electrode on the body above the heart that sent a Bluetooth reading back to the computer, and we monitored them for 25 minutes. The first 5 minutes was just them sitting there so that we could get baseline reading. The next 5 minutes, we gave them the forceps, had the device in the right direction, and allowed them to play so they could get acclimated to what the sound was like and what it felt like. Then the stressor began. We covered the board, which actually surprised everyone. Then we readjusted the man on the other side and had it shining through a mirror. And then the stressor began. After that was for 5 minutes. The remaining 5 minutes, we did a de-stress. And the de-stress really basically consisted of them cussing us out and how stressful the test was. And then we ended with 5 minutes with their head down, eyes closed, and a guided meditation so that we could get all phases of their heart during a stressor. So at the end of the 4 weeks, participants would return. They would repeat the same test. They would do the Pittsburgh Quality Index. They would do the heart rate variability test. And everyone's goal was to beat whatever they did before. And then they turned in their sleep diaries. We then gave them their post-study questionnaire. And we then gave them an envelope that had their group assignment because everybody wanted to know, did I get the sound technology or not? We then also gave them information on where they could purchase the sound technologies in the event that they loved it and it did work. And then we also gave the MP3 files to everyone because remember, the people in the music only group didn't have the opportunity to experience it. And we thought it was fair to let everybody try it. We then gave everyone 2 $25 gift certificates. Now, I make it a point that whenever I write a research grant that you do compensate your research subjects because if it's a study that requires multiple visits and they have to give blood and they have to do something for a sustained amount period, that's the best we can do. And I think they were appreciative of that. So here are our results. I hope that you can see these. We did a statistical test that calculated, was your group truly randomized into 2 randomized equally? And 3 things came up to show that it wasn't in 3 areas. Number 1, we had more females than, let me see if I can move this out the way. We had more females in the music group for some strange reason than the binaural beat group. When we got to race, we had 1 American Indian. So of course that made one group different than the other. And then we had 1 warrant officer in a group, which made that different from the other group. Statistically, that did not make any impact on the outcome. So it really didn't matter. Now from the top, as you can see, as any military study, you're going to have more males and females. The mean age for the study was between the ages of 37 and 38. The majority were Caucasian, the majority were married. Army was the most, and it didn't have anything with the fact that Army had more health issues. The installations we were working on were very Army heavy, so that's why we had more Army than everybody else. As far as status in military, majority were active duty, and then they were majority enlisted soldiers. Now, when we look at what happened during that heart rate variability test, and I apologize if there's anyone that has an issue distinguishing blue-green, but I'll orient you. The image on the left is when we did low frequency heart rate variability measures. And that is basically what was the sympathetic drive. So when I stress you out, how out of control did your heart go? Now, the column in blue, which is the columns on the left side of the pair, are the before and the greens are the after. And the group on the left was the music group. So this tells us that when we stress them out and they used the music for 4 weeks, they actually got worse when we stressed them out the second time. Whereas the group on the right, although they had higher issues with stress, after using their intervention for 4 weeks, their stress actually decreased. Now, when we look at the column on the right, the image on the right, this is high frequency measures. So we wanted to do a measure to see, can we validate that the first one wasn't a fluke? And this way we look at parasympathetic control. What happens after the stressors stop and you need to calm yourself down? If you can see, the group on the left is the music only group. They dropped, which means they could not calm themselves down enough after the stressor end. Whereas the group on the right is the group with the technology. They were able to better calm themselves than the group that had the music. So now when we look at the C-reactive protein measures that were done before and after 4 weeks of using the stressor, we see that the people in the music group on the left, their C-reactive protein increased drastic. To me, that was a substantial increase. And then if you look on the right, this is the group that had the technology. It actually decreased. Now, the problem was that this was not statistically significant. And the reason why was because, remember, we had them do a questionnaire. If there were any extenuating circumstances that could have messed up the analysis, we had to throw that information out. And given the numbers of people that we had to exclude from the study, it did drop the number of participants, which messes up your statistical analysis. So although clinically you see it, we can't truly validate that that was statistically significant. Now, this one I thought was probably the most important. In the sleep diary, there were two questions. Were you stressed at work yesterday? Were you stressed at home yesterday? And all they had to do was put 1 for yes and 0 for no. Now, the line in red, the dotted line, are the people who use the music with the technology. And the line in blue were the people who use the music solo with no technology. And every day throughout the entire 4 weeks of the study, the people who used the technology consistently reported less stress than the people who used the technology. So now we have cardiovascular readings that showed us that this theta frequency did work. We have chemical measures that were leaning towards telling us the same thing. And now we have subjective measures that are definitely saying the same thing. Now, one of the questions we did ask, which I thought was very interesting, and it did play an important role on how we structured phase 2 and 3, was that we asked participants, okay, bottom line, the point was to decrease your stress enough to go to sleep. Do you feel the intervention you had helped you to have less stress and go to sleep? Surprisingly, everyone, probably, I think it was about 75 to 80%, stated that, yes, I went to sleep much quicker than I normally do. Now, bear in mind, the people who listen to music outweighed or said that it affected them better more than the people who use the technology. But when you look at their objective clinical measures, it said the total opposite. And that let me know that, yeah, we can wake up and say, oh, I had a good night's sleep last night, when technically, clinically, you really did not have a good night's sleep. Now, as far as phase 2, and phase 2 is what's currently in progress right now, and we should be finished data collection, I believe, in August. We structured the study very similar to phase 1, but remember, we have a crossover method. Now, the only difference in the study was, number one, we saw that the majority of the participants were married. And then we realized, you know what, deployment not only affects the person who left, but it affects the persons who were left behind and who now have to deal with the person who just came back from deployment. So we included them in the study as well. The second thing we changed was, now since phase 2 and 3 are looking at the delta frequencies and seeing if we can keep someone to sleep, we got rid of theta frequencies and we got rid of the heart rate variability and replaced the instrument with a sleep actigraphy monitor. Now, the sleep actigraphy monitors were from Philips, and it tracks how long it took for someone to go to sleep, how many times they tossed and turned at night, if they awoke in the middle of the night, and so on. And it also had a device that captured light. So we were able to track if someone was working days or night, if they were using their devices like television or their phones before too close to bedtime, and other factors. And then, of course, they did the sleep diaries as they did in the first phase. And we extended the study for 6 weeks because, remember, they took a break in between and they're doing another intervention. Same MP3 players, same headphones, and the MP3 players were loaded with music or the tones that were in the delta frequency. So again, as we said, phase 2 and 3 was crossover, and we're looking at 4 measures of sleep. Before you had an intervention, if you had music with the intervention, and then if you just had the tones alone. And the 6-week breakdown was as follows. You had that 1 week of baseline where you wore your sleep device, didn't use any intervention. You then had 14 days of using phase 1. You then had 7-day break, and then you switched your intervention for 4 days. Now, what's the point of all of this? First, remember, our goal was, can we calm them down enough to go to sleep? Yes, we can use theta frequencies, place them into music, and someone can use them to get them at least into a sleep phase. Second, we're hoping that the data will show that delta frequencies does impact sleep positively, whether it's keeping someone asleep, whether it's getting them through the phases of sleep, or is it, let's see, just if we can get them at least to stay asleep. So the next logical choice is structured waking. What can we do about getting someone to have a structured waking at the right time in a sleep cycle? And you can do this by adding alpha and beta frequencies at the end of a 6, 7, or 8 hour track to allow someone to have a structured waking. This would be a great idea for someone first who is traveling and they're going into different time zones, so their circadian rhythm is off. Or it could be someone who is working erratic types of shifts and they just need something to reset them to the right rotation for their sleep cycle. Now, if we could do that, then we can personalize it. One of the issues where people did not like whatever the carrier was, whether it be, was it white noise or was it music that they didn't like? But then if you can personalize it where the person can choose, okay, I need to go to bed, but I'm only have 4 hours I can get to sleep. Can we program the device to give us 4 hours of sleep where it starts with theta, you have delta in the middle, and then you have your alpha and beta at the end to get them up? Now, some lessons learned that we've learned through the studies that I think will make a big impact for future studies is, number one, there's no doubt about it, people are interested in brain entrainment technology. With all the evidence of all of the videos that are posted on YouTube where you can just say, I want to be in theta, and you can select a video. And then the fact that we had a wait list for a study, which is very rare. People trust it, people believe in it, and people want to try it. The second thing we learned, which came as a surprise, is that if you have tinnitus, it actually makes the tones horrible, makes the tones worse. It took a few people to let us know that, because one of the most common post-deployment issues that we do see now are people suffering from tinnitus. And the fact that tinnitus comes and goes and you don't know when you're going to get a bout of it, using the frequencies is a bad idea. The third thing we learned was a way to personalize it. We came across an app by, I think it's called the Bonsai Labs, and it's called Brainwave. And they make 3 different apps. And on one side of the screen is the desired frequency that you want to be in. And then on the right side of the screen is what carrier do you want it on? Do you want it on a mountain stream? Do you want it on an airplane? Do you want it on the beach? And using that same technology, could you layer that onto a person's personal playlist? For example, if you hate New Age music, and it seems that a lot of our frequencies are in New Age music, but you want something different, can you layer the frequency that you want onto the appropriate music on your playlist? And we think that that can be done. Now, as far as phase 2 and 3, the lessons we are learning, I have to give a big shout out to Luigi, who was my instructor in the lucid dreaming course. And he alerted me to the fact that the audio files that we were using were total delta, meaning there was no gradual decline into delta. It was delta all the way through the audio track. And if you think about it, we gave people the MP3 players that looped. So basically the person had delta all night long. And that's really not good, because it doesn't allow the person to go into REM sleep. And when you have that break in between the 2 interventions, you have no interventions, the person goes into something called REM rebound. And what REM rebound is, a succession of like dream catch up, where your body's like, okay, let's catch up on all these dreams that we missed. And that could be a bad thing, especially if dreams are negative for the type of clients we were dealing with. And last but not least, there are some phenomenal devices out there for capturing sleep data. 2 of my favorites, and this is not a paid endorsement is the Aura ring, which is a ring that measures a lot of the measures that are important to sleep, as far as temperature and movement and activity for the day. And there's Auto Sleep, which is a app that can go on your phone. Now, these are fantastic, but the problem is you cannot truly distinguish phases of sleep, whether someone's in phase 1 or phase 3 or REM, unless you're really in a sleep lab and you do have electrodes. So these are good guidelines, but I wouldn't really use them for good hard research for phases of sleep. So in a nutshell, that's really the reports of the studies. Again, phase 2 and 3, we will have that data analyzed in August, and I'll be sure to put that information and give it to the Monroe Institute to let them know what happened. And if anyone wants to contact me in reference to any of the studies that I've done, or just for anything, please feel free to reach me at my website or to reach me at my email address. And with that said, do we have any questions?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for not just your research itself, but for the very succinct way that you have presented it to us today.
Thanks.
It's, I'm always fascinated by such in-depth research, and I'm sure you met a lot of very fascinating people in the process of this. One question we had, and someone was wondering if you could just explain a little bit more about the tinnitus.
Sure. Okay, tinnitus affects people differently. Some people, tinnitus sounds like a clicking. To some people, it's like a high-pitched tone. Everybody has, it's really different, but it's basically the side effect of damaged hearing for some whatever reason. And if you think about it, the tones, if you really listen closely, it has that wavering woo-woo sound. And if you have a high pitch and then you got the woo behind it, it really makes for an uncomfortable experience. We don't have any data that it causes any more damage, but it is definitely uncomfortable to the listener. So we try not to let them, if you have tinnitus, not to use it. And I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think probably you are aware that Bob's earliest studies were sleep studies. He was very curious about how we use what he called the other third. And this was very important to him. As I mentioned to the group last night, he, Scooter would say that anybody came over to the house to visit, they'd be grabbed and, here, listen to this. I want to see how this works for you. So he was very interested in helping people use sleep effectively. Paul, do you want to field one of the questions? We've got quite a few flowing through here.
Definitely, yeah. Actually, I have a question of my own, first of all. And the first thing I'll say is that I knew you looked familiar because I was you mentioned that lucid dreaming intensive. I was there with you. That was like, 2 years ago. Yep, with Luigi and Thomas.
Are you the boat guy?
I am the boat guy.
Sorry. I have to talk to you offline.
Oh, good. Okay. We're back on land now, but that's a whole different story. So anyway, yes. Yeah,
so good to see you. I'm sorry. I didn't even put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah, I know, it was a while ago. So anyway, so coming from, obviously sort of the lucid dreaming, fun that we had there, I'm curious if any of the participants reported any kind of other effects, like either, maybe mystical experiences or lucid dreams. Like, was there a mechanism to capture any other effects that might have happened that weren't planned in the study that you found interesting? Yeah,
lucid dreaming. We did have feedback, and I think it still coupled with what Luigi taught me about the fact that they were having REM rebound. So they were kind of forced into dreaming, because these were probably people who didn't let themselves relax enough to get into a dreaming state. And now they're, thrown into a dreaming state. So we did have a lot of people say, yes, I had lucid dreaming during this. And we just chalked it up to that was probably the reason why.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yep, that's great. And did anyone have any kind of, did they get benefit from that other than just, kind of the study? Did anyone have any interesting experience that really opened them up to, like self-awakening or a larger reality, or was that just not something you looked at?
Well, no, it wasn't something we looked at, but anybody, if you have a good night's sleep, it puts you in a better frame of mind mentally. So I would say one of the comments that we did get is I was better able to cope with the day. And it just could have been the fact that you just got a good night's sleep. So no, that wasn't questions we asked, but those are good questions to ask in the future. Definitely.
Sure. Right.
I don't know if you were able to be with us yesterday, but Judith Pennington, who presented the studies from Discovery, was curious as to if you've considered monitoring your subjects on EEG before and after the study to see if theta and delta amplitudes might increase.
Yeah, we thought about that, and how do I say, the relationship that we had with the group that was going to do it was going to require that the persons stayed, because the best way for us, again, it was all about sleep. They had to be in maybe a sleep lab type of environment, and having someone to commit to stay and be there to put these devices on was very difficult. We did review some of these devices that couldn't be used in an outpatient setting, and it was not feasible for the type of people that we had in the study. So yes, if we could, my dream study would be, okay, get some people to commit. Let's come into a lab that we can have access 24/7 and get a variety of measures with an EEG, because I do think an EEG is going to be the make or break to really validate some of the things that we're looking at.
I saw a wonderful meme yesterday, and the fellow's lying on a bed and almost every inch of his skin surface is covered with a suction cap.
Yeah.
And somebody's saying, now go to sleep. Oh,
Sure, yeah. So another good question here from Suzanne. And she points out that a parallel group with many of the same issues is parents of children with special needs, especially when the baby or child has major medical issues. So there are issues of trauma and stress in these parents. She's used hemisync meta music with many of these families, but often find that they're so stressed that they just don't continue to use the recordings. How do you see the results of your study as being applicable to this group and other non-military individuals who have trauma and sleep issues, from other experiences?
That's a hard question. Oh God, that's a hard question, because it's kind of like, what is it like? I know this is a stupid analogy. We know we have to take antibiotics all the time for us to at least see the effect. And unless you can commit somebody to dig in and just try this and just see it through, we're not going to have enough of effect to make them think it will work, if that makes sense. I hope that answers the question. That's the only thing I can think about. You have to really get somebody to commit to try, to just try and just stick it out to see an effect.
Right. But it seems like this research, though, would apply to anyone who's dealing with any kind of traumatic stress. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think so. Any military, as we know, any military research is applicable to real life. A lot of the first responder research was based upon what's done in the military. So yes, I think this is applicable. You just have to structure it for the type of environment you're in. A mother who has kids, you have to kind of structure, okay, when is it appropriate for her to be able to use this, given the other things that the person has to deal with.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm sure you can imagine people, who are working, 80-hour weeks or, extremely stressed at work being, of course, having sleep issues, and this being very applicable.
Of course. Yeah. Everybody has sleep issues.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
I do want to share a comment with you from our friend Tip, who says, Dr. Gantt, what a marvelous presentation. Content, organization, and delivery masterfully done and most engaging. Thank you very much. I wanted to get that into the record.
Thanks, Tip. I miss you.
Great. I'm seeing a number of comments in here talking about, people with tinnitus who say that they're still getting benefits from binaural beats as a sleep, even with tinnitus. So that's great to hear.
That is interesting, because we did have nasty comments. This is horrible. I can't do this. And that's interesting.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to find out what type of sound that they're getting, what type of tinnitus they have, because maybe it's a certain type of tinnitus that has a worse effect than the other. that'd be good to
Yeah,
know.
I could imagine it, yeah, being very personal to the individual, and depending on how their tinnitus is manifesting,
Right.
there'd be an issue.
I have a form of tinnitus, which is really almost not noticeable at many times, but then when I stop, I realize I'm hearing this humming, this buzzing.
Yeah, buzzing.
Very low level. It doesn't get into peaks or things like that.
Yeah.
And I don't find the binaural beat to be a problem myself.
Good. That's interesting.
Yeah. I got another question here. Are you aware of any civilian studies being done with binaural beats? I know we heard from Judith Pennington yesterday. Have you, I'm just curious if you've come across any other studies, similar to this, on the civilian side?
Yes, there are plenty of civilian studies, surprisingly, because when we were writing the grant, we had to do a literature search to show that, yes, other people are doing it, and yes, it's safe. We're not going to hurt anyone. So yes, there are plenty. What I can do is I can post a lit review of all of the studies that we came across, and that may be helpful to someone who's looking for people who've done studies. Yeah, there are definitely studies out there, and continue.
Wonderful.
Yep. Excellent. Let's see, Susan, anything else that you're seeing?
They're going very quickly.
Where do you see this going? Does it go, might it go beyond just sort of the military and the government? I mean, when something like this goes on, where does it typically spread from there in the government?
Well, unfortunately, what I've learned in doing research in the military is if, first of all, no one's going to be as enthused about your research as you. And then in the military, unfortunately, we're not at assignments more than 4 years. So when you leave, there's nobody to hold the fort down for the research. So you kind of have to take your research and then reinvigorate to new places where you go. The future, I did want to try to be able to do research to see if a structured 7, 8, or 9 hour track could help somebody that has all of the tones in it to get them through a good sleep. But again, you have to try to make that connection. Since I retired from the military, I no longer have the inside connections, and many of the people that I knew are retired with me. And 2020 was just a mess. You can't get in the facility unless it has to do with COVID. So I have no idea what we can do next. One person recommended the VA. And the only problem with the VA, they have the same restrictions. No one in the door unless it's COVID related. Sure. So it's a hiatus to maybe a time to write some good protocols, see if you can get some funding, and then come out the gate swinging. So that's the, I'm a little bummed because I'm hyped, but there's so many barriers in the way right now.
Yeah, I imagine.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for bearing with us after we had to close down last year and coming back, and for agreeing to be on the virtual one. And we have 181 participants today.
Right.
So we were just delighted to be able to get this out to so many people.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.